I never set out to find them. The first thing I noticed was the architecture. Door frames in municipal buildings rose far above any practical need, stair treads spaced too widely for an average stride, furniture in state archives no ordinary adult could use without climbing. I assumed it was stylistic excess, the kind of decorative choice historians file under grandeur and never examine again. Then I found the photographs. Not illustrations, not folklore, but formal portraits from the mid-1800s. Men and women standing beside ordinary citizens, proportions so far beyond the normal range that the images should not exist. The lighting matched, the grain matched, the shadows fell correctly. As those photographs began to form a pattern, I encountered a name removed from the maps: Tartaria. The name appears on maps printed in London, Paris, and Philadelphia throughout the late 1700s and early 1800s. It is not drawn as an uncertain frontier. It is engraved with the same authority as Prussia or the Ottoman Empire, a landmass stretching across northern Asia with internal borders and named cities. Encyclopedias of the period describe its trade routes, its climate, its governance. Then, roughly between 1840 and 1890, those references disappear. The maps are redrawn. The encyclopedias revise their entries. In less than 2 generations, a territory once considered stable enough to chart becomes a historical embarrassment, explained away as a loose collection of nomadic tribes. That explanation has never fully accounted for what remains on the ground. In administrative centers across Russia, Central Asia, and parts of North America, there are buildings whose internal proportions do not match their documented purpose. Service corridors with doorways 12 feet high, staircases with risers that force a person of average height to stretch, baseboards and chair rails set at heights that make no ergonomic sense unless the occupants were significantly taller. The conventional view treats these features as stylistic choices, expressions of power or aspiration. But stylistic choices appear in public rooms, not in back hallways and storage wings where no one would see them. These are functional spaces, and they were built to a different human scale. Photographs from the mid-1800s add a further complication. Formal portraits show men and women of extraordinary stature standing beside ordinary citizens, sometimes in family groups, sometimes alone. They are not sideshow images. The subjects wear the same clothing as everyone else, hold the same poses, sit in the same studios. Many of those studios used standard backdrops and chairs, which gives a useful point of reference. A chair that reaches an average person's shoulder rises only to the waist of the person beside it. The proportions are consistent, the perspective is unforced, and the images predate reliable photographic manipulation. Those photographs are held in public collections, but they are rarely exhibited and even more rarely discussed. The problem is not that any one of these details is impossible. The problem is that they align. The maps disappear in the same decades the photographs cluster. The buildings that no longer fit ordinary human proportions are often the same buildings that appear behind the subjects of the photographs. The official record separates these facts into different disciplines: cartography, architecture, medicine. That separation keeps the pattern from being seen as a pattern. If you have encountered a similar photograph or a building with those proportions, the phrasing used in the local record often reveals whether it was treated as fact or as a curiosity. I would be interested in how it was described. The photographs demand a different kind of attention. They are not dramatic in composition. A man stands beside a doorway, his head nearly touching the lintel. A woman sits in a studio chair, her knees rising awkwardly because the seat was built for someone a foot shorter. In each image, ordinary people stand nearby, offering an unintentional scale reference. These are not carnival promotions or postcards sold as novelty. They are formal portraits, cabinet cards, and tintypes produced by working photographers who recorded what was in front of the lens. What makes these images difficult to dismiss is their internal consistency. The shadows fall across faces and clothing without contradiction. The focus extends through the scene the way it should for a single exposure. The hands of the subjects rest on chairbacks or door frames with the natural weight of a person who has stood in that position many times before. If these were manipulated, they would be among the earliest convincing manipulations in photographic history, produced in small towns and provincial studios where the technical skill for such work was rarely available. The subjects themselves appear in official settings. Some are dressed as railway foremen, building overseers, or municipal guards. Others sit among families of ordinary height, their difference accepted rather than emphasized. Newspaper notices from the same period mention individuals of unusual stature serving in administrative roles, supervising construction crews, or representing civic institutions. The language is matter-of-fact. There is no sense that the writer believed he was recording something impossible. That absence of surprise may be the most unsettling detail. Museums hold many of these photographs in files labeled as medical anomalies or unverified portraits. The classification itself performs a quiet function. Once an image is filed under anomaly, it no longer requires explanation. It becomes a curiosity rather than a piece of evidence. But the volume of surviving material suggests these individuals were not rare. They appeared often enough to be photographed regularly, employed visibly, and accepted publicly. The question is not whether such people existed. The question is why their existence has been so carefully redefined. Local newspapers across North America and Europe add a further layer. Reports from the 1880s and 90s describe unusually large human remains uncovered during railway cuts, cellar excavations, and mound clearances. The bones are measured, recorded, and sent to museums or universities. Then the reports stop. The specimens are no longer mentioned. The archives contain no record of final disposition. The pattern repeats often enough that it begins to resemble a process rather than coincidence. Some of those reports include descriptions that would now be considered impossible. A femur longer than a man's arm. A jawbone wide enough to fit around a modern skull. Burial vault with a doorway cut to a height no ordinary worker could use comfortably. These accounts were printed in local papers, often with the names of witnesses and officials. They read like observations, not editorials. The writers did not treat the finds as extraordinary because, in that period, they may not have been. The question worth asking is not why such reports existed, it is why they stopped. If you have looked into similar accounts in your own region, the wording used often reveals whether the event was treated as history or as rumor. That distinction matters more than people realize. The tools are harder to explain than the photographs. A wrench measuring 5 feet in length, rusted but intact, recovered from a demolition site in the American Midwest. A hammerhead found in a European municipal building, its handle long gone, but its weight suggesting a user with twice the grip strength of an ordinary laborer. These objects exist. They are catalogued in estate sales, displayed in local museums, and sold at auction as industrial curiosities. The standard explanation is that they served some specialized industrial process, a machine function, a factory need. But the wear patterns tell a different story. The grips are polished from repeated handling. The edges show impact marks consistent with manual use. Someone held these tools. Someone swung them. That recognition changes the question. If the tools were manufactured for a specific purpose, why do they keep appearing in ordinary administrative buildings, courthouse basements, and municipal storage rooms? Why are they found alongside furniture scaled beyond human proportion, not in factories, but in the places where governance and oversight were conducted? The pattern, suggests something uncomfortable. The buildings were not merely designed to accommodate larger bodies, they were operated by them. The furniture reinforces this impression. Chairs with seat heights of 30 inches or more, desks with writing surfaces too high for a standard adult, bed frames long and wide enough to hold a person 7 or 8 feet tall comfortably. These pieces are not ceremonial. They show wear from daily use. The upholstery is compressed, the armrests scuffed, the feet worn from being moved across wooden floors. Museum labels describe them as oversized Victorian design, as if excess alone explains their existence. But a chair is built for a body. When that chair shows evidence of actual use, the body it was built for becomes the only relevant question. The locations matter as well. These objects appear in government buildings, administrative centers, and institutions of authority, not in private homes. Not in theaters or hotels, in courthouses, municipal offices, and railway administration buildings. The pattern is too consistent to be accidental. The people who used these spaces were engaged in the work of oversight, record-keeping, and construction management. They were not hidden away. They were integrated into the machinery of governance. Newspaper reports from the late 1800s describe individuals of exceptional size performing exactly these roles. A man in Ohio, serving as a railway foreman, noted for his ability to lift a section of rail that required 3 ordinary workers. A woman in St. Petersburg, employed as a records keeper in a municipal archive, her chair described as unusually large. These are passing mentions, embedded in articles about other subjects. The writers did not treat them as remarkable because, in that context, they were not remarkable. They were colleagues, supervisors, public servants. The photographs, the tools, the furniture, and the newspaper notices all point in the same direction. The people existed, they worked, they held positions of responsibility. And then, sometime around the turn of the century, they vanish. The photographs stop appearing. The newspaper reports cease. The furniture is reclassified as decorative. The tools are labeled industrial equipment. The memory is reconfigured into something that can be filed away without requiring explanation. When you see a tool that size in a local museum, the label often says more about the institution than the object. I would be interested in what it claims the tool was used for. The skeletal record is where the official silence becomes most difficult to defend. Throughout the late 1800s, newspapers across the United States and Europe printed accounts of unusually large human remains. The New York Times described a 7-foot skeleton found in a Michigan mound in 1885. The San Diego Union reported bones of extraordinary size unearthed during a railway excavation in 1895. The Middletown Signal recorded giant human remains discovered in Ohio in 1899. These were not fringe publications. They were mainstream newspapers reporting on events that local communities considered newsworthy but not controversial. The accounts share a common structure. Workers digging a foundation or clearing a mound uncover a stone vault or a clay-lined pit. Inside lay a skeleton of unusual length, often accompanied by artifacts of copper, iron, or worked stone. The bones are measured in the presence of witnesses, sometimes by a local physician or county official. The remains are then collected and sent to a museum, a university, or a government institution. And after that, the record goes quiet. The Smithsonian Institution is mentioned repeatedly as the final destination for many of these specimens. In some cases, the reports state explicitly that the remains were shipped to Washington for study. In others, the wording is vaguer, noting only that they were delivered to a representative of a state historical society or a federal agency. What happens after that is rarely documented. The specimens do not appear in catalogues. The institutions now deny that such remains exist in their collections. The explanation is always the same. The bones were lost, misplaced, destroyed, or never actually received. That explanation strains credibility when applied to hundreds of separate discoveries over a 50-year period. The sheer volume of reports is difficult to reconcile with a process of ordinary bureaucratic error. In Ohio alone, newspaper archives contain dozens of references to oversized skeletons recovered from mounds and burial sites. In the Caucasus, Russian surveyors reported similar finds. In Central Asia, British and French expeditions described burial chambers scaled far beyond the size of the local population. The reports are scattered across languages and jurisdictions, but they describe the same phenomenon with the same matter-of-fact tone. Then, around 1920, the reports stop. Not gradually, but abruptly. Discoveries that would once have been front-page news simply disappear from the record. The skeletons already found are no longer mentioned, the sites are left unpublished, the museums fall silent, the timing is significant. It aligns with the period when the last references to Tartaria were being removed from encyclopedias and atlases. It aligns with the moment when the photographs of unusually large individuals ceased to appear in public collections. Choose a voice that resonates with you and let's begin our creative audio journey. The evidence did not vanish. The interpretation of the evidence changed. What makes this pattern so difficult to ignore is its institutional character. Individual mistakes are random, but when museums lose the same type of specimen, when universities decline to discuss the same category of remains, when archives across multiple countries stop recording the same kind of discovery, the pattern suggests a collective decision. Not a conspiracy in the theatrical sense, but a quiet agreement that certain questions are not worth pursuing. The remains become anomalies. The anomalies become footnotes. The footnotes become forgotten. The question is not whether every report was accurate. Some were undoubtedly exaggerated, misidentified, or fabricated. The question is why so many independent sources describe the same thing, and why the institutions entrusted with preserving that evidence chose not to retain it. If even a fraction of those remains were genuine, the implications would require a fundamental reassessment of recent human history. The silence surrounding them is not evidence of their absence, it is evidence of how disruptive their presence would be. If you have examined the institutional records in your own country, the gaps are often more revealing than the entries themselves. I would be interested in what you found missing. The architecture itself becomes a form of testimony when you stop accepting the standard explanations. The official history tells us that massive stone buildings across Europe, Asia, and the Americas were constructed by local craftsmen using techniques passed down through generations. The dates are confident. The architects are named. The methods are described as primitive but effective. Yet the physical evidence does not always align with those claims. Consider the doorways. In administrative buildings from the 1700s and 1800s, internal doors often measure 12 to 15 feet in height. These are not entrance portals designed for public ceremony. They are service corridors, back hallways, and private offices. A door that tall serves no practical purpose for an ordinary occupant. It wastes heat, complicates construction, and requires custom hardware. The standard explanation is that such proportions conveyed authority or matched the architectural language of classical revival. But authority is conveyed at the entrance, not in the storage wing. The pattern repeats too consistently to be purely symbolic. The staircases compound the problem. Risers in many of these buildings are 7 to 9 inches higher than modern standards. A person of average height must lift their knee noticeably to climb each step. Over 3 flights, the effort becomes exhausting. These are not grand ceremonial staircases. They are the stairs used by clerks, guards, and administrators every day. If the buildings were designed for ordinary people, the stairs were a daily inconvenience. If they were designed for someone with a longer leg, they were simply stairs. Then there are the door handles and window latches. Many original fixtures sit at heights that require an average person to reach upward uncomfortably. The wear marks on the metal show repeated use, not decorative placement. In some buildings, the original counters in municipal offices rise to chest height on a 6-foot man. The stone basins in washrooms are set so high that a modern adult must stand on their toes to use them. These are not isolated details. They appear together, in the same buildings, across different countries and construction periods. The conventional view treats each feature as an independent architectural choice. The doors are tall because of stylistic convention. The stairs are steep because of cost. The fixtures are high because of error or alteration, but when all of these choices appear in the same structure, the explanations begin to strain. A building is designed as a system. The proportions of its doors, stairs, counters, and fixtures reflect the bodies of the people who used it. If every element points toward a larger occupant, the simplest explanation is that larger occupants were expected. That possibility becomes more difficult to dismiss when the photographic record is placed beside the architecture. In several portraits, unusually tall individuals stand in front of doorways that align perfectly with their height. The door is not oversized relative to them. It is proportionate. The building makes sense when the person in the photograph is placed inside it. The same cannot be said for an average occupant, who would be dwarfed by the frame. The official narrative has an answer for this as well. The individuals in the photographs were anomalies, rare cases of gigantism or unusual growth. The buildings were designed according to classical principles that favored exaggerated scale. The photographs and the architecture are unrelated. But that answer requires accepting an improbable coincidence. The rare individuals appear in formal portraits during the same decades that buildings of unusual scale were being constructed across 3 continents. The architecture that matches their proportions is the architecture they are photographed standing beside. The separation between the two is maintained only by treating them as different categories of evidence. When a building and a photograph describe the same physical reality, the reasonable approach is to consider them together. The alternative is to protect a narrative that was established before the evidence was examined. That is not how investigation works. That is how orthodoxy maintains itself. The buildings remain. They are not hidden. Anyone can stand in a municipal corridor from the 1800s and feel the scale pressing down. The question is whether we trust that direct physical experience or the explanation we have been given. I would be interested in what you felt the first time you stood in one of those spaces. Thank you for watching this video. Click here to watch another video that might interest you.